ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
You sick fucks. You've seen one too many, bro.
I said, don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to the It Slays podcast. I'm Rowan.
Hey, it's Exilia.
And this is Mike.
And we are back, and we are celebrating. It is our Pride episode. Happy Pride, everyone.
Holla!
I should say, too, today is actually the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Tonight, specifically.
We're recording this Friday on the
8th
of June.
Hashtag remember Stonewall.
Yes, and they were probably hot as hell there, too, because I'm feeling the heat. I'm feeling the heat, and we have the same climate, and I'm like, whew, that really added to it. I'm really feeling it.
I mean, maybe the impetus for Stonewall was not the cops being, cocksucking assholes, but maybe it was just that everyone was really fucking hot. Everyone was just really hot.
I look and I feel right now like how I feel they felt in this movie most of the time.
Yeah.
They were
Gay rights
sweaty.
came from people being hot. That's it. Everything. You've heard it here first.
Oh my god.
Gay rights equals being too hot.
So I figured we would start off with a question, check in with everyone. So my question today is I want to know, especially on this Pride month, what has everyone been listening to, music-wise, or podcast-wise?
Oh, I will go first, because Stonewall, hashtag gay rights. I am listening to the new Kim Petras album, which just came out today, and she's this amazing German trans, pop singer, and her album is giving me life. So, everybody listen to Kim Petras.
How about you, Exilia?
I don't remember all month at
Just
all.
In general,
but recently, I've been really embracing my rural Nova Scotian roots and how similar they are to West Virginia. And I've really been listening to a lot of bluegrass and southern gothic rock and stuff. And this really actually, through that, I found this excellent blues singer / southern rock singer. I think her name's Adia Victoria. She's a woman of color from the South, and she kind of brings that subject matter to her songs. So I've listened to 3 of her albums. Some song called Cavalier I've been listening to in the past couple of days. I have no idea who sings it, but I just listen to random songs that I find on Spotify that I am feeling the vibe of. I don't know.
There you go.
What about you, Rowan?
Dear Spotify, please sponsor us.
Yeah.
That's right. Free Spotify accounts, please. What have I been listening to? Nothing incredible, because I usually listen to mediocre. I decided to get my mid-2000s hip-hop on, and I've been listening to DJ Drama albums and mixtapes that are terrible. What else did I listen to? I've been listening to Meek Mill's first mixtape because I really enjoy that, and Spotify.
We used to kill that mixtape.
Just got in
Calgary.
But I have kind of been inspired a bit with it being Pride Month. Me and Exilia, this beginning of this week or maybe end of last week, we decided to revisit watching Closet Monster.
Oh,
that's
classic.
We always revisit watching that. Shout out to Newfoundland. And so I've definitely had the soundtrack on rotation all month.
It's literally one of the greatest soundtracks of any movie in the last 5 years, probably.
I wish they had it on record or any sort of physical copy. It's amazing. I also want to say I've been listening to a lot of We Are the Champions by Queen and singing it to Rowan to put in his face that Toronto won the championship. I know our last episode we were discussing how we were in the championship and we won, obviously, if you're living under a rock and you don't know that. So I've been
Sports bro.
What even is sports?
Sports
So-
bro auxiliary is back.
So Rowan's been telling me all this shit about the Celtics, and then I just sing that song to him. It's a fun little rivalry we have here between Rowan and I.
But speaking of Toronto, related things and pride related things and etc. I just want to plug a cool CBC podcast. Because I don't know if I'm sure anybody who would maybe potentially be listening to this probably knows this story already. But there's a really great CBC podcast about the Bruce McArthur story, the serial killer.
Oh my god, I was gonna talk about him in this because
Okay, good. Yeah, but they do have CBC podcast did do a series about that story, and it's on Uncover, and it's called The Village. And essentially it's about anybody who maybe potentially is listening to this and has not heard of it. Essentially there was a serial killer for 20 years in Toronto's gay village who was murdering people, and he was a gardener and burying them in people's planters and gardens and shit, and it's fucked up. Anyway, and he finally got charged and brought to court and shit. So CBC did a podcast series about it, and it's chilling. It's chilling.
I think I might have heard about the podcast, because at work we have the news in our. Well, we watch the news in our break room, and we also watch it in our department. And so I basically watched all the coverage of the trial as well, and I think they might have been kind of discussing that at some point. Yeah, that was a fucked up. The last person that he murdered actually was right when me and Rowan were apartment hunting here. It's a crazy story. A guy that I work with that hangs out in the village a lot, actually frequents a lot of the bars that Bruce McArthur used to frequent. Oof. And he knows people that have interacted with him and met him and knew him and stuff. So it's crazy.
I feel
I'd also talk, it's also interesting. That's all I kind of thought about when I watched this movie too, because it kind of there was a lot of tension between police and the LGBTQ community, because they were begging them to investigate this for so long and do it in a serious way. They had already known about Bruce McArthur years ago, and basically just were oh, he has nothing to do with it, even though he was connected to every single person they knew about. So it kind of follows the theme of a tension between police officer and the LGBT community as well, or police in general.
And I'm really glad that you made that connection, because I had a lot of notes when I was watching it. I wasn't going to specifically bring up this podcast and stuff, but I was going to mention, obviously there is a lot of tension between, especially in Toronto or in somewhere like New York, in a lot of metropolitan areas, between, the queer communities and police.
Yeah.
But, and that was a specific Canadian, reference where it's there's a lot of controversy essentially between should we let police be involved in pride parades and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's but they also people that kind of are on the end oh yeah, obviously let them come in their uniforms and stuff, and it's you don't understand the history that there is between
police and
the queer communities and cops and being arrested and
well, that's the thing, Pride is initially a political protest rather than a celebration, which is it's kind of turned into...
it isn't a celebration. It is absolutely a revolutionary act.
It was a tool they used. And actually the same person that I work with that frequents the village a lot, I was asking him, did you do anything? He just went to the bars he goes to, but he was Pride is literally nothing but corporations now, pretty much. And then I had brought it up to somebody else that I know here that's part of the same community, and he's it pretty much is, which is nice, in the way that if it's genuine, it's nice support, but I feel a lot of time it's just bandwagony.
Well, yes,
from the companies.
And it's a lot of people, who critique kind of corporate bandwagoning of Pride will say, do you support LGBTQ plus initiatives in the community? Do
your
you
workers?
Do you hire people belonging to these communities? Do you support them, etc.? Because if you're just throwing a rainbow on shit, but you don't hire anybody, you don't protect your employees who are part of that community and stuff like that, right? You know what I mean? It's just like it's a huge issue. It's like, are you just doing this for the clicks and the dollars, or is it actually something that you're interested in? Because there are a lot of companies that will, use the rainbow, and obviously they do have, initiatives where like they help their employees and they like, hire people and they make sure that, they're, anyway, whatever.
Yeah. But there's a kind of also the issue of like corporations co-opting something that is political and like a protest as well.
Oh yeah.
Kind of like when what was it, Pepsi and what's her name? Kendall Jenner.
Pepsi and Kendall.
And they're like, if you just give them Pepsi, like everything will be great. Like, yeah, like there's something unsavory about that. But I digress. Sorry.
I was gonna say, before we get too much into it, why don't we actually introduce the movie?
Oh yes, the movie we're talking about this week. By the way, now that we've went on our giant rants about it.
So the movie is Cruising from 1980, directed by William Friedkin. Is it Friedkin?
Friedkin, yes.
How would you like to disappear?
Disappear?
Go undercover.
You know this man?
Who's here? I'm here. You're here. These victims are all the same physical type.
What about him, Skip?
Late 20s, 140, 150 pounds. Dark hair, dark eyes.
Have you ever seen him before?
I want to send you out there to see if you can attract this guy.
How, where?
A New York City detective in search of a killer is about to disappear into the night.
Is it dangerous?
I can't talk about it.
How do you know you're gonna end up the same person when it's over?
An odyssey to the edge of city life.
Bartenders are starting to give me some information. There's this name keeps popping up all the time. There he is. The one with the hat.
Is that the one that followed you?
Yeah.
Why didn't you go with him?
I don't know. I think you should check him.
If you want to play, I'll play with you.
He's the wrong guy.
Prince don't match.
What he sees.
Who's here?
What he feels.
I don't think I can do the job, Captain. I don't think I can handle it.
I'm here.
There's just stuff going down. I don't think I can deal with it.
You're here.
What he experiences. What he discovers will change his life forever. Al Pacino.
Who's here? I'm here. You're here.
Cruising.
Okay, so the bio for this, as always, we're gonna go to the ever-riveting IMDb. The bio for this movie is: a police detective goes undercover in the underground S&M gay subculture of New York City to catch a serial killer who is preying on gay men. I mean, I guess that's pretty
apt.
Pretty what it is, I guess, yeah.
I mean, that's like 70% of the like plot of the movie right there.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, it's worth saying that we are going to go right into the review, because we decided to skip Mike segments because we're scared of humanity, essentially.
Normally I do the parental advisories, and it's, a laugh and stuff, but, like, I feel like this would just be depressing, and, you don't want to, like, lose faith in humanity during Pride Month, so in this one instance, we're just gonna skip over that and just have fun and, talk about it, like, amongst ourselves. We're all verklempt. It's like coffee talk with Linda Richmond. Like, we're all just gonna discuss it.
Hey, are you interested in becoming a horror hound? Then join us at www.patreon.com/itslayspodcast and check out everything we have to offer. We have cool things from podcast shoutouts to picking movies all the way to maybe getting yourself a free t-shirt. So if you're interested in joining us and becoming a horror hound, join us at patreon.com/itslayspodcast. And so I figure probably the first question that some people that listen to the podcast are probably wondering is they're like, this isn't really a horror movie. And as we were picking, I know we went back and forth on what we wanted to choose, but I think it is appropriate for what month it is, because I think this is as we briefly discussed, like, very similar situations to this movie, like, happened right here in Canada and happened all over the world. And it really is a horror thing in real life for, like, a real community. Mm-hmm. So I think it's more of sadly realistic horror. Because obviously, it's kind of listed as like a thriller, psychological thriller. Even fictional serial killers are used often in horror, where I think it is a lot more kind of terrifying when it's set in reality, which this is based off a book that is set on on events. So why don't we talk about just our initial feelings of this movie? Like, we always talk about, do we have any, like, interactions with it previously? Have we heard of it? Let's start with Exilia first, and then we'll go to Mike.
Okay, I had never heard of it before, until Mike brought it up. That's pretty much it.
There you go. So, Mike, how about you?
Okay, well, as we know, I have spent years and years and years of my life watching the, like, classic movie channels and shit like that. I don't know. I honestly can't say when, and this is weird because for most movies or series and whatever, I can pinpoint the moment or, like, within a certain, time frame when I first saw that movie or when I first came in contact with that series, or, you know what I mean? Like, when it came into my life and it was a thing and I became aware of it. I don't remember when exactly I became aware of this film. I mean, obviously, I've been a horror diehard all my life, and I knew, I was aware of him as a director, and I'd seen a number of his other movies. And this was one of those that, back in the analog days when, not everything was available online, but some of it was, and it was this notorious Al Pacino movie that he directed. And, it was like, oh, okay, cool. The guy that directed The Exorcist directed Al Pacino in this horrifically, controversial, notorious movie. I don't even remember. I don't think I rented it, actually. I think I saw it on, like, the movie channel, maybe, and I taped it off and watched it at, like,
I cannot
1 o'clock
imagine
in the
this
morning,
being on the movie
maybe.
Channel.
Oh, no, it was on the movie channel. It was 100%, because, trust me,
I'm not
it was not available. You would not have been able to walk into a movie store and just rent this. It was something that, at that time, and this was before, Scream Factory and Arrow and all those people were, like, picking up old cult titles and re-releasing them. This was at some point when I think it just randomly came on a movie channel at, like, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, well, I'm 16 years old and I'm curious about this, so I'm going to watch it. And I taped it off and watched it, and I was like, what the fuck did I just watch? I'm pretty sure this just completely, informed my psyche for the next 5 years. Al Pacino watching some person getting fisted in a nightclub in New York to this brilliant soundtrack. Boom, cue.
Yeah, we talked about how
7
good
years
the
of my
soundtrack
life.
was.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I was not aware of this movie until we threw it around, because I think we started throwing around the idea of reviewing it at the beginning of the month, and never heard of it. And then, yeah, it was like literally every other podcast I listened to brought it up. And I had said to Mike in a text, I was like, literally even the sports podcast I listened to was talking about cruising when we were talking about it. And like basically talking, like, saying good things. Like they were saying, oh, like it's like really controversial, but like it's really well done.
We also just bought Knife Plus Heart.
Yeah.
And the description, like the synopsis of that is like, talks about this movie.
Yeah, and on the back of the Blu-ray for Knife Plus Heart, yeah, it says it's like a mix of Suspiria and cruising, which, yeah, so we thought, I feel like all signs pointed to
last
us doing
week's
this.
episode and this week's episode. Wow.
Yeah, so that was all, that's the only experience I've had was Mike bringing it up and, yeah, us watching it. Let's get into it. I mean, Mike talked about it being controversial. I'm sure as we talk about it, we can talk about that. I
think actually I was reading the real world events that were unfolding around this movie, and I think that is actually the most interesting part.
Yeah.
Like the controversy is actually just like super interesting.
Yeah. I'm gonna suspect you're gonna tell us about it.
Oh, right now? Okay. Well, I mean, we can get like organically into that, but
let's start with, I guess, something just about the movie. Like, let's start with our kind of generic, like, did we have any favorite scenes in it, or like what did we like, anything we overall like really liked about it aesthetically, or Mike, why don't you shoot this one first?
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. If we're talking about things we liked aesthetically, I love everything about this movie. I love the soundtrack, I love the cast, I love the cinematography, and I know we get... Okay, first of all, I'm gonna say, we could do a spin-off podcast, and maybe we will, if anybody wants to drop us a comment on iTunes and let us know, you could certainly do that. But I feel like we could do a spin-off podcast of the A, decor used in these movies that we review, and B, the fashion. Oh my fucking god. Everything about this movie, the fashion, the decor, I felt in like every fiber of my being, and the soundtrack, everything was just like superb. Like, and I know it's just so bizarre because it's like the guy that directed The Exorcist directed this, and it's such a weird, offbeat, like left field turn for him, but like it's so brilliant, it's so well done. To me, it's like Exorcist level good.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say it's really interesting too because as I was reading about it, like about the film, he like really didn't want to direct this for a long time. Like, I saw they interviewed him a couple times, and he said they kept bringing this script to him.
I thought he was a screenwriter.
Well, they had brought the ideas to him.
Okay.
I don't know who it was, but he said they kept asking him to make a movie about this book, and he kept saying that he wasn't really interested because the book is not set in the S&M world.
Well, there's also, it's based on 3 things. I can't remember the other 2, but it's based on 3 different things. The book is one of them.
But it's also, like, weirdly, it's, like, based on a book, but it also has that, like, police procedural style of narrative as well.
Yeah, it very much has that, like, cop movie beat
Oh,
it.
absolutely.
Very,
Meanwhile, it's like you don't even think about that because it's like, what? He's a cop and not just like looking for water sports? Because let's face it,
Don't put that hanky in your pocket,
Al
asshole.
Pacino put the fucking yellow hanky in his goddamn pocket. I don't remember which one it was, but either he wanted to piss on or be pissed on. I'm just saying. Al Pacino is into water sports. You heard it here. It's official.
It's gonna be on TMZ tomorrow.
TMZ, Al Pacino likes piss.
Yeah, I like how that was the one he picked.
I know, but it was so funny, though. It was so funny because, like, they had that one, it was a very small scene, but in a way it was a very important scene because, like, you know, it's highlighted. He's the only, like, it's him and that dude in the sex shop, and it's like, you know, he actually says to him, and it's a very evocative scene, and it's very, like, clearly highlighted. Him going in and saying, what is this? And, you know, it shows the hankies, and it's, in a way, it's brilliant, because at this point, what was this, 1980? Nobody, like, in mainstream culture really would have known about, like, the hanky code, and, like, what, you know, all these fetishes were and stuff. So it's like, oh, you know, this means that, and this other color means that. But it's like, he specifically says, yellow means, you know, in this pocket means you like being pissed on, and the other pocket means you want to piss on. And then, like, 5 minutes later, it's like, Al Pacino has a fucking piss fucking thing hanging out of his pocket. Yeah.
I actually really like that part, too. I don't even know if that's, like, a real thing, but it just kind of shows just the undergroundness of it and how you, because of how stigmatized it is, like, you have to have, like, some sort of code. Also, it kind of reminds me of these people we used to go to high school with called the Purple Bandanas. And if they were wearing a purple bandana that day, that meant they were selling smokes. And if they weren't selling smokes. But it was like code. It was like code. And only people that knew the code knew what it meant.
That was the only relation, is that it was code.
Yeah, that was the only relation, was that it was like using a bandana as code. I just thought it was interesting.
But I mean, it makes sense in a way, because it's the same sort of idea in that, like, there is...
it's a signal to people who are
what do we
know.
call it? Like, I actually have a phrase for it written down in my notebook. Okay, I can't find it, but it was something like essentially the semiotics of public sex.
Yes.
And that's what it is. It's like, it's in the very similar way. It's like the semiotics of public transactions, whether it be for smokes or for dick in your
Golden
mouth
showers.
or being pissed on, but it's
Yeah.
the semiotics of like a sexual social exchange, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or in that case you were talking about, like an exchange between here's 50 cents and I want to smoke. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that's really interesting.
It was interesting as that part to me as I watched it, like, because like you guys said, like, especially like I'm thinking about the time period it came out and like how really like kind of, you know, as controversial as the film is, like how like revolutionary it really is in terms of like how it's like really revolutionary, like projecting these images of like S&M and this like alternative like subculture. Because I mean, even though, you know, we're talking about, you know, this came out in the 80s, it's like set in like late 70s. But I mean, if we like when I think about it, I'm thinking about like the 60s, like kind of, you know, the free love movement. But the free love movement, if you're heterosexual, and none of that really involved like fisting guys' assholes if you want to, or pissing on each other. Like, it just really, like, brought in that there is this subculture that's, like, kind of left out of these conversations. And also within that community, which I, you know, we will talk about, like, that's where a lot of controversy comes in, is, like, when it's hard to talk about an entire community because communities have...
Not everybody thinks the same.
Not everyone thinks the same, and communities have subsets within themselves. So there is people that live these lifestyles, and this is probably a good point, good spot to put in and say that, like, almost all of the backgrounds in this movie are actually gay men from that scene in New York.
Clubs.
Those were real clubs, which interestingly enough, I was reading that at least 2 of them were owned by the mafia.
Yeah, well, apparently a lot of them are. That was like a common thing back then for those clubs to be owned by the mob.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, like, so, you know, participating in this film was that, like, subset of people.
I have some more, I don't want to talk about it right now, but I have something related to that as well when we talk to the controversy. But in terms of, okay, well, 2 things. In terms of my favorite scene, I guess, I'm obsessed with beautiful apartments and I'm obsessed with plants. So the very end, like the girl, Alfred Pacino's girlfriend,
Karen Allen.
Woo! Yes.
Oh, also, okay, before you go on, I'm just going to digress for one moment and say that I don't know what Rowan will go into the controversies about this movie and homophobia.
Exilia will.
The purest form of homophobia that is found in this movie is that Karen Allen, who is a queen to everybody LGBTQ+, is barely used in this movie. That is homophobia right there. Anyway, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry.
So that beautiful scene at the end with her apartment. Yes.
Her apartment. Okay, first of all, I can only imagine how much that place costs in New York City. It is huge and it is bright and it's beautiful and she has so many gorgeous plants. I was just like, that's all I commented on. On that scene, I was like, whoa, look at all those plants. Like, those are so beautiful. That was my favorite scene. In terms of like the historical, Rowan was kind of touching on, I don't know, the historical aspect of it. One of my supervisors for my master's is like very big into hermeneutics, which is basically going back and like trying to see what ignoring your own interpretation of like a text and trying to like think about what the person that wrote the text actually means in their like context and history in their life. And so I don't really do that for the movie, but I do like try to put myself in a position of somebody in 1980 that's gonna like go see this movie or like just happens to see it. I remember, when did Brokeback Mountain come out? Like 2006, 2007, around then?
Mid-2000s, yeah.
I was definitely in high school, and I remember me and Rowan went to see that in the theater, and we are from a rural area, so like that does definitely impact how people viewed that movie at the time. But I remember they kissed, and people, like, that was so risque, and this is like 2005. I cannot imagine how risque this movie would have seemed back in 1980.
Imagine everyone in our town's reaction when men kiss, and like everyone's shocked. Now imagine on that big screen that man's asshole being fisted.
In 1980. Like, I actually cannot imagine.
I'm sure it was like scanners, like heads were just like exploding.
It's true.
And I'm not gonna lie, I feel like one of the greatest visual moments in 1980 cinema, not 1980s, but 1980, when this came out, cinema, is when, you know, Al Pacino first goes into that club and he's looking around and he's seeing everybody. And, you know, honestly, and I have many notes written about this, like, it's actually not that scandalous in a way. Like, the whole movie itself is not that scandalous. I mean, maybe in 1980 it was scandalous, but, like, looking at it now, like, from a 2019 perspective, it's like, meh. You know, 50 Shades of Grey 3 years ago was, like, so hetero and so, like, tame in comparison.
Oh, in terms of the S&M aspect?
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, it's like, you know, to me, one of the greatest images of cinema of 1980, I think, is when Al Pacino's in that club and you watch the dude just
the guy putting
Crisco all over his arm, like right up to his elbow, and it's like, yeah, and it's like, you know, and it's fine because maybe, like, I want to say 75% of people that have watched this movie did not know what that Crisco arm was going to do. But when it shows the arm, just, you know, like, kind of shoving into somebody and you don't understand that it's like that arm is now literally inside somebody. You know what I mean?
It's true.
I also do want to say, as we talk about favorite scenes in Al Pacino, to me, greatest scene in the film is when they like huff the
it was like
poppers in the handkerchief.
I do really like that scene.
And Al Pacino does that ridiculous, like, he's definitely in competition with Crispin Glover in Friday the 13th for weirdest dancing of all time.
Okay, I love that
scene.
3 lines of my notebook are taken up with the words in caps, iconic dance scene. That is, honestly, I think that is quite possibly one of the 20th century's most iconic dance scenes. And it's just such a fucking shame that, like, nobody watches this movie because that dance scene and just that, like, fucking violent, jagged dance that Al Pacino does. And it's just like, he doesn't give a fuck. And that's the same. And that's the thing. And this whole thing, like, to me, the most scandalous thing about this whole movie. Okay, there's a couple scenes where, and it doesn't even show fisting. It intimates fisting. Intimates, that you're doing X, Y, or Z. Honestly, the most scandalous thing that happens in this is that it's a bunch of sweaty dudes listening to good music, just dancing, and they're fucking dancing, and it's like fucking amazing, and like they're just like fucking rocking the goddamn fuck out.
And I 100% believe that, like, I'm like, there's no way, like, they were like, this is how you. I 100% will believe, I don't care what anyone tells me, that he is just not a dancer, and they were like, we need you to dance like you're in one of these clubs, and that's what he did, and it was spectacular. And I also want to talk about, because I gotta say, because we're not gonna do favorite quotes for this movie, but this goes for my favorite scene and favorite quote. I might even have to put the clip in the episode. But towards the end, when the perceived serial killer guy is like basically like asking,
how big are you?
Party size.
And I'm like, I just listened to Al Pacino say that his dick is party sized, and this is ridiculous.
What does that even mean?
Well, I know, but my brain was trying to process it. I was like, is it small or is it big, like family party size? Like, I'm like, this can mean very different things. I don't know what is going on. I also want to quickly bring up, I know I'm taking up all this time, but I want to reiterate the soundtrack was
it's really good.
Incredible. So good. Oh my god.
I think the grime is the name of the main song they use from a punk band, and I was reading that they actually did the entire soundtrack, but it all got cut except for like that one song they did. So they originally were supposed to do the entire soundtrack, but it was such like a perfect mix because it was weird, like, even though they had, like, this punk music playing, he also had, like, dark orchestral music playing behind it, and he was, like, literally layering these two opposing musics on top of each other, and it was incredible, and I really enjoyed it.
I found it was really interesting how much, Al Pacino's character tried to reinforce his heterosexuality, though. I think, like, that's the only reason they showed him and his, like, partner having sex on screen. Also, like, when they took when he was like, I have to have a break, like, I'm getting all messed up, which, now that I remember, that's also one of the things it was based on, was actually an undercover cop who, like, wrote, I don't think it was like a memoir, but wrote some sort of like article or something about being undercover and how it, in that, like, scene, and how it, in quotes, like, screwed up his mind or something. So I think they're like always like kind of reinforcing his like heterosexuality.
But let's be realistic, like, even when he's like roughly having sex with his girlfriend or fiance, because I think it's a girlfriend, but I kept thinking they were trying to say fiance because they showed like a ring on her finger and they like kind of like focused on it, whatever she is. I want to know about you guys, but I'm like, you're not fooling anyone. Dude. Like, I'm not fooled. No trickery over my eyes. Just a reminder to follow us on all of our social media at It Slays Podcast. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, soon to be on Tumblr. Of course, we're on Spotify and iTunes. And if you're adding us on iTunes, don't forget to leave us an iTunes review. It doesn't even need to be 5-star. We appreciate 5-star. But the most important part is we want to hear from you. So write us a text review in the iTunes app, and we will make sure to give you a shout out on the podcast. Every review helps as it bumps us up in the search engine, and that's what it's all about. Back to the podcast.
I also thought it was weird that like every single famous person, the only straight people in the movie were like the famous people. You know what I mean?
And the cast is like super impressive.
Also, that guy from Modern Family, he's so young in it. I couldn't believe it.
Or Modern Family, or Married with Children.
Yeah.
Who from Modern Family?
The
the guy that plays the grandfather in Modern Family. The guy, what's his name? Ed whatever
Neal or something.
He's not in this.
Yes, he's like one of the cops.
He's in it for like
what?
One scene.
Okay,
he has
okay,
like black
because
hair.
Okay, so I'm gonna. I will blow my load too soon, which I always promise I will never do. Because one of the characters in this movie, who, if we jump forward later on into the plot, remember how there's the next door neighbor.
Yeah.
With the curly blonde hair, and it's like he keeps talking about his roommate Gregory, who is a dancer and travels around and blah blah blah. And remember how when Al Pacino at some point goes over there, and then the regular dude's not there, but Gregory's there?
Yeah.
Anyway, and that's James Remar, who is from 8 million fucking movies and TV shows. He has been in Dexter, but I know him, and I've had a crush on him since 2000. He was in The Warriors, if you guys ever saw that. The Warriors, Yeah.
I kept saying, I was like, I literally most of this movie,
but James
I feel
Remar,
like I'm watching The Warriors.
Yeah, and the guy from The Warriors, Al Pacino shows up at his door, and then it's like, oh, here's the main character from The Warriors, just
is
with
he
these
the one with the bottles on his fingers?
Hot ass.
No, I don't
fucking, neon green, Y-front, goddamn man panties,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
like I said, the cast is Paul Sorvino.
Oh,
yeah, he was
so
really young
good.
there
The
too.
cast is really good, and Karen Allen, of course, as Al Pacino's girlfriend, homophobically underused as she is, but
Karen Allen is in what I consider the all-time greatest Christmas movie, Scrooged.
Oh,
with Bill
Scrooge,
Murray.
Of course.
That's where I know her best.
And also the single greatest Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost
Yeah,
Ark.
true. I always forget she's in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cast is incredible. Yeah, the aesthetics, everything about this. I really at first, I remember, because I definitely read up on it before we watched it, and I really felt like, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, all the controversy, and the look, just the look and the feel of it, just drag you in. I just felt like I was enticed. So let's talk about some of the controversies for a little bit, because I feel like the more we talk about this movie, that's kind of the elephant in the room, or the green handkerchief in the pocket. It's signaling us to recognize it.
Okay, you brought it up. What does a green handkerchief mean, Rowan? What does that mean?
I'm trying. I don't know if I remember. Is the green handkerchief the blowjob one, or was that blue?
I don't know. Blowjob, boogers. What's the difference?
I don't know.
So there was a huge controversy at the time. Protesters actually tried to prevent this movie from even being filmed. This guy, Arthur Bell, who was very he wrote for the Village Voice, and he became a columnist
columnist.
Columnist for the Village Voice. He kind of like rose to prominence after writing a really good piece apparently about Stonewall. He said, and I quote, he promised that this movie was going to be the most oppressive, ugly, bigoted look at homosexuality ever presented on screen. And basically they would like go and they would like stand and basically the director, he wanted to film in real buildings in this area. Like he filmed at the real bars and everything. And so the people that were protesting would like go and stand in front of the shots, or the residents in the apartment next door would turn on the music super loud. So we were watching it and Rowan's like, this sounds like it's like dubbed or something. It actually is dubbed.
Yeah.
Because, the residents were trying to drown out the sound of the dialogue to wreck the movie. So they had to go back over it after it was like done and overlay vocals onto it.
I was reading like almost the entire audio is dubbed audio.
Yeah.
Because they just ruined everything. People
would like go outside and just like be screaming. They did pretty much whatever they could to kind of wreck the filming of this movie. It was interesting though, because they actually talked, basically a journalist ended up participating in the filming of this movie, like at the bar, like the bar scenes. And he spoke about it. And I guess it was only about 25 main people that were really protesting this. And then they'd have like odds and ends of people every day. But there was over 1,600 people that were from that community, like this specifically like leather, like subculture, that frequented those bars, that participated in that movie, and they had no problem with how they were depicted. And actually this journalist said that they think that the protesting was more actually just a protest about that subculture itself, and they didn't want them to be perceived by middle America as being part of that subculture, like the whole community being part of it. So those people actually just saw the protesters as stigmatizing them as well, which I thought was interesting. Also, there were a couple hate crimes that were committed that were like attributed to this movie. One was the screenwriter of Philadelphia and his partner were like threatened physically by a group of men, and the group of men said it was because of this movie. I don't know how that like went down, but also 2 months after the release, one of the bars that was prominently featured, the Ramrod, had a mass shooting, and 2 people died and 12 people were injured. And the person who committed the crime attributed it to this movie as well. But yeah.
Okay, so are we gonna bring up like Pulse?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool, 2 people got shot. Let's talk about Pulse in 2019.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, it's interesting as we look at, like, what, quote unquote, like, violence that this movie has caused. But, like, when you talk about stuff like Pulse and stuff, like, in recent, like, the violence is there with or without the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
People, and we see this in music, we see this with, like, this justification of, like, oh, like, this art medium is, like, making me do this, when it's like, no,
it's like the broader culture.
Your hatred for, like, this community is making you do this.
Yeah. Well, it's about they're part of the broader culture.
Yeah.
So, like, Al Pacino said that this movie actually made him realize, because he never thought about how the events in the world affected, or like how a movie would affect the events in the world, and how like him playing a role, basically he was just kind of thinking about, basically it made him, all the protesters made him consider about how his role as an actor affected real world events. And that wasn't really about the crimes, that was just about the protesting.
I was gonna say, it's also interesting to put in that I'd be interested to know as he got older how he felt, because I did read that he actually like refuses to talk about this movie anymore.
Maybe he's talked it to death. Like, maybe people asked him about it a lot.
I'd be interested to see the reasoning.
I mean, it's been 30 odd years, right? Like,
30 odd
years
years
almost.
I also think, like, you know, he's always kind of been, like, the face of, like, male...
Yeah, like mobster.
Like, mobster and, like, action, stuff like that. Like, he is, like, the definition of, like, you know, like, an American, you know, male. And so I feel like there may be some issues there.
Also, I think that the thing about how there was, like, 1,600... men involved that were part of that community and like 25 protesters, and I think that should just like show you that not everybody that's part of a community has like the same opinion. It's not like groupthink. But also this movie has been like revisited very frequently, mostly by like LGBTQ critics. And interestingly enough, when it came out, the big issue that people had with it was representation, and now the thing that they actually are praising is representation. So it's interesting how that shifted. But if anybody wants to read more, a guy named Jason Bailey has done an article in the Village Voice. He did it last year, and it's called Making Sense of Cruising. It's actually a really informative and interesting like history of the movie in terms of like context of how it's perceived.
And the only thing I was going to add was me and Exili tried to not read the same articles. So I didn't write who wrote it, but I'm sure if you Googled it, like it was in the first page, Slant magazine did
I
an
love
article
Slant.
on it.
I love Slant. # follow Slant.
Yeah, it was really good. It wasn't, I did read the Village Voice one as well. It's not as in-depth. The Slant one's a little more humorous, a little like more pop culture-y. But I thought one of the humorous things when talking about this movie is now that we have time to reflect on it as a society and as the LGBTQ plus community can reflect on it and what it means. The author was saying that the only thing that we should really be appalled at is the fact that the director was trying to fool us all to thinking that these men were listening to punk music in 1980 in these clubs, where the author was like, I was like alive when this happened, and he was like, they were literally listening to like Diana Ross, and like he was like, the punk music like wouldn't
have this been like disco era?
Yeah, when he was like
80,
especially in New York,
80.
and especially in like New York City.
Yeah, he was like literally like, this is nothing of the kind of music that would actually be played in the club, and like,
Okay, but it's so funny that you bring that up, though, like, because I have a note about that, and I'm like, it's just so funny. Like, I understand that, I mean, obviously, this was not none of us were alive during this time, but, like, kind of from cultural osmosis, you know, sort of what would have been the dominant cultural, like, style at the time, and the dominant, you know, even underground scene, because I feel like, you know, the three of us have a fairly decent grasp on it. But, you know, it was just so funny because I made a note about how it was a punk-flavored soundtrack in a time and a place, 1980 in New York City, right? It's like, and I got it. And I was like, I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, okay, like, I would have assumed that in any kind of, like, gay club and stuff, that it would have been, like, underground disco and shit like that. But at the same time, I totally, like, from an auteur point of view, and I mean, obviously we can look at like William Friedkin, who is definitely a horror auteur, and you know, he's like a very talented director, and I found that the fact that he used this punk music to be very it was really interesting, and like I thought that it sort of contributed to like bizarrely a like commentary on the like kind of queer S&M culture in general, because if you look at like punk music, obviously we think of it as being like this countercultural thing and something that's like resistance to the dominant culture, and you know what I mean, things like that. And then when you look at it, especially at the time, and the like subculture that they're looking at, there was a like theoretical perspective where it's like queer S&M culture and like nightclub culture and stuff like that is like opposed to this like kind of normal heterosexual like patriarchal kind of culture. So you know what I mean? Like in a way it's like having punk music associated with like these people being like half naked and their asses hanging out and shit in clubs and like getting fisted and shit like that is like diametrically opposed to, you know, the like disco of the era, which is where it's like, oh, this is like the safe, you know, people from the like kind of hetero patriarchal society, you know what I mean? Like it's this diametrical opposition, and I just thought that was like a kind of a brilliant use on his part of punk. Like I made several notes of it, of like the punk music being a marker, like a signifier of like other, and it's like this is like a culture that is not, it's not of the mainstream. And there are several points when the characters, including the cops, actually say, and some of the like more sympathetic cops, because some of them, you know, obviously they're like oink oink,
giant pieces
oink
of
oink
shit.
pig, yeah, exactly, like this kind of like I smell bacon cop type people. But there are some actually sympathetic ones that actually, you know, and that's, I think this is almost revolutionary in this movie. Some of the cops are actually very sympathetic, and, you know, it opposes that in terms of like, you've got a culture that is like kind of dominant mainstream nightclub culture, and then you've got this, sort of revolutionary resistant culture to like the normal kind of hetero patriarchal, you know, vanilla culture. You've got these like dudes getting fisted in nightclubs, and it's like, this is not meant to be mainstream. And somebody actually says, I can't remember which cop it is, but one of the cops actually says like, this is not mainstream gay culture. You know what I mean? And I thought that was really interesting that they made that distinction, because I feel like Enemy Row will probably speak to this now because he did more research on the controversies of it. But like, I feel like maybe one of the controversies was that, you know, they were taking a subculture of gay culture and representing it. And people were like, this is not representational of all gay culture. But one of the cops actually says, this is not mainstream gay culture. Like, this is a subculture. And this is the whole point. Like, you know, they go into this movie and they say, like, this is not mainstream. Like, this is an extreme part of the culture. It's a part of it, but it's a subculture. And you know what I mean? I thought that was so interesting that, like, you know, they made that distinction that this is not mainstream culture, obviously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what the journalist that was also acting in the movie had said. He said that's why people were like, the protesters, the small group of protesters, that's why they didn't like it, because this was like a fringe group. Yeah. So they thought that when people in Middle America saw this movie, they would think everybody was part of this group. Like, that was fully representative of the whole LGBTQ plus community, when really it was just like, that's like a fringe, like underground thing.
Yep.
So
and one of the cops who are like, when we look at it, the avatars of fucking boring ass middle goddamn America, because what is more boring in middle America than fucking cops, says, you know, hey, this is fringe, this is you know, this is not mainstream culture. Like, we know that this is not every, you know, everybody, queer person in America, even though it's maybe a lot of them or whatever, but like, we know this is not like representational. Like, literally, the fucking cop who is the avatar of Middle America says, I understand this is not everybody.
I think the problem is, at this point in time, like, in actual, like, the world, like, history in North America, at this point in time, Middle America didn't have a, like, media representation of what people in the LGBTQ plus community were like. It wasn't really until this campaign, I think it was called Speak Up, and I believe it happened maybe at the end of the 80s, if I'm remembering properly. But basically, this campaign was like, people, like, encouraging people to come out, and then that's when a lot of people were they did come out, and a lot of people were like, you know, my neighbor is gay, my, like, sister's a lesbian. Like, that's when they started realizing that people that they love and have been around their whole lives are actually part of this community, and they're not like, you know, what would be represented in this movie. They're just people like everybody else, and they like live their lives. They just happen to like be attracted to someone of the same sex. So I think that might have been the problem, was that the people that were just like middle of the road, like not part of this fringe group, were worried that the representation would be off. Which, you know, we've kind of advanced a lot in that way now. Like, we know that doesn't represent everybody, so maybe that's why now the representation part is more interesting and more accepted, because it is a representation, but we acknowledge that it is of that group, like subculture specifically, and not everybody. But I also think that it's interesting at the club, like they're obsessed with wearing cop uniforms, and they have like precinct night. And I think that's a really interesting aspect too, just because of the relationship that they do have with the police.
Oh yeah, it's totally appropriating the the oppressive, because
it's almost like subverting it.
Oh,
like,
absolutely. And I've got so many fucking notes about this. And I mean, you know, when you look at this, it's like 1980. But think about the last even 2 or 3 years. I mean, anybody who is sort of paying attention to Pride festivities in any large city like Toronto or anything like that knows that there's like an insane amount of controversy about police officers and who kind of can and can take part in like Pride festivities and stuff like that. Like, and whether, you know, if you're a cop, like whether you can wear a uniform or not. And I just thought it was so interesting, the like way that this interrogated the relationship between law enforcement and these like subcultures. And because there are moments like, say, you know, because there's that one character, I don't even remember their name, but you know, they're like, I guess they're like a sex worker, but you know what I mean? Remember when 2 of them are in the cop car? Yeah. And they are brought up several times during the movie, and like they're a really cool character, you know, and they're like, you know, you need me as much as I need you, and shit like that. And but I just find it so interesting, the like relationship between law enforcement and like just the whole like kind of queer subculture. And it's just so bizarre that like at 1980, like clearly, and I mean, I know it, like it's not really interrogated in any degree. It's just sort of like touched upon, because clearly it's only like several, like maybe 3 or 4 moments during the movie where they touch upon that relationship and how fraught it is. But like, I mean, the last time I had watched this movie was years and years ago, and I didn't, you know, really obviously have the same amount of like kind of cultural experience and shit that like I do now. But like, I was watching it, you know, rewatching it now, obviously for this podcast, and it just, the relationship of like the cops with the community, just like, it took my breath away, because I, you know, see this like, especially like, I mean, maybe not here in Newfoundland do you see, like, there's still controversy, but like, especially,
I mean, that was, they had that for like a few years in St. John's.
Absolutely. Even. And I mean, especially in like, I know a lot of people say in Toronto, and like, you know, there's horrific amounts of like controversy and shit, like, you know, in terms of like Toronto Pride and like cops and who can show up in cop gear and not and you know, it's just like, holy fuck, it's this like insane, you know, relationship that like, this was 1980, so this was like almost 40 years ago, and it's still like, it's this relationship that is still being interrogated, and it has not been like, to this day, you know, there is still no resolution in this. And I think like people are still getting upset about it. Yeah.
I think one of my biggest critiques about this movie is it's even the background actors are almost exclusively white.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And like that also brings in another huge like element to it, is like, not only were people persecuted because they were part of that community, but then there's like, they're also persecuted on top of that because of their people of color too.
Well, yes, because you've got like, just adds queer like people, which is one layer, and then you got queer people of color, which is a whole other layer,
and then like trans people of color. Like so it's just like, I do find like,
and then you've got that like, is sex a huge critique of mine and shit like that. Yeah.
So I'm also, to backtrack a little bit, sorry, about punk music, at that point in time, while punk would have been like dying down, but punk was actually like a very exclusionary subculture in terms of like race. And
it was very
white.
Like
punk very was white.
Very white.
Very male dominated.
You almost don't want to admit it, but it was very white, very male.
And I would say it's like, it was very heterosexual as well.
Oh, obviously.
The only thing that was really overly counterculture about punk, just like off the top of my head, I used to be very, very, very into like 1960s, 1970s punk music, but is like their aspect about being against like the government and the monarchy and all this stuff. Other than that, they like really kind of fell into mainstream stuff. And their fashion was also obviously like different, but
on point.
Horror hounds. Do you guys like horror music? I like horror music. Exilia likes horror music. We know Mike definitely loves horror music. So if you love horror music like we do, join us on Spotify. We have a playlist up called the It Slays Podcast Horrific Playlist. We have some of our favorite tasty jams from some of our favorite horror movies, and we're always consistently adding to the list. And let us know. You can email us or Facebook or Instagram us and let us know if there's anything we should add to the playlist. I was going to say too, because I thought it'd be important to bring up, going back to the Slant article, they brought up a good point that I think should, everyone should kind of hear and listen to. Kind of a two-part point. The first being that once we get into the 80s, we're then talking about like the AIDS epidemic and especially like in the gay community.
In New York City, too.
In New York City. And I think that was another scary point he kind of brought up in the Slant thing, was that it's hard to contextualize this movie because this movie was pre-AIDS epidemic.
And that is one of the things about this that I think, like, because it's so controversial from like a lot of perspectives, I feel like that's one of the things that people have the roughest time with, is that this was pre-AIDS. Like, yeah. And you, when you look at it, like, as a culture, like, unless you're of a, like, certain age, I feel like everybody up to a certain extent is, like, kind of saturated with that, like, from, like, the late 80s onwards is, like, AIDS, and it's this horrific, obviously, like, plague, and it just infects every way that you look at, like, sexual culture and, like, LGBTQ culture and stuff like that. But, like, you watch this and it was just, it is pre-AIDS, and it is just a complete, and I think this is why a lot of people have a problem with it, and some people really enjoy it, because it's complete abandon. Because when you get to the point of, like, where AIDS starts to infect everything, like, pun intended, obviously, the narratives and stuff of, like, sexuality and, like, sexual exchange and gender identity and all that. But, like, this was before that. So it was before that the narrative was, like, infected with that. So you could have this, like, culture where it was just, like, fucking with abandon, It was just abandon, and there was no consequence other than... But in a way, like, it's so bizarre, because in a way it's, like, without AIDS, but it predates AIDS, because, the controversy of it's somebody killing people in these clubs. So it's like, in a way, it almost, like, predicted AIDS, because it was like, you can't just go out and go to, like, this S&M club and bring somebody home and tie them up, because they might actually stab you to death. You know what I mean? And, like, it's just this weird, like, kind of cocktail of pre-AIDS anxiety, I guess. And
I can see how it would be could be kind of controversial for people in, like, that are in middle America and really don't have a lot of exposure, because back then people thought, like, only gay people got AIDS. You know what I mean? Like, that was, like, the biggest, like, misconception. And there was, like, this big misconception of how, like, the LGBTQ people were just, like, very incredibly promiscuous, which is kind of like somewhat reinforced in this movie as well. So for someone that's like in middle America and had seen this movie, and then like the AIDS epidemic comes up and this movie's set in New York City, I can see how maybe they're like, oh yeah, I saw this movie, and like that kind of reinforces that thinking. But
yeah, well, and I was gonna say that so that was kind of the first part of the point he brought up, and the second part was just to kind of almost like build a respect, like, you know, no matter how you feel about this movie, because, you know, in the Slant article, he's like reiterating that, like, you know, there was 1,600 people about that worked on it, and like there's a good chance that most of those people
that was in the Village Voice one.
It was in the Slant one as well.
Oh yeah, that they had passed away from AIDS.
Yeah, like that a lot of those people that were part of that community that like
were in that movie,
in this movie, like passed of AIDS. And you know that, so you're really talking about like, it's not necessarily like you know, this carelessness and shock, but it's like, you know, they didn't know.
No, yeah.
They didn't know, and it's like, yeah, just showing that respect.
That's a thing too, like nobody knew it was a thing, right? Like,
and I was gonna say, to me, like, I don't know if it was maybe the Village Voice brought it up. I saw it brought up in a couple things I read, but it was also you know, one of the controversies with it is like, you know, the kind of association of like violence and like sadistic tendencies with homosexuality linked. I had read it, the book that it's based on had a lot heavier tone. Yeah, apparently the book is like really has like some undertones. Like the cop in this story, which they didn't go with the narrative. Like the cop in the novel is like very racist, like very homophobic. Like there was a lot of more layers to the story that kind of he cut out when he directed it. But that was one of the issues and the contentions with the book, was that it kind of, you know, it was like, oh, serial killer, and the serial killer is gay, and it's like associating like violence. And
was he? I thought he was straight.
No, he wasn't.
I think in the Village Voice, it might have said that he was.
So this is, this is the ambiguity that Friedkin wanted in the movie.
That you didn't know.
So, but what Friedkin explained, further interviewed, I guess we can talk about it now just because the ending can be confusing, and he meant it to be. So the letters were basically, he said the story was that he was gay and his father was like not accepting of it, and he wanted to like,
that's why he never sent the letters,
win his father's love over.
Well, yes, and he was talking to like the ghost of his father,
but he wanted it to be ambiguous. So, you know, we saw that the person that lived next door got murdered. So, like, of course, you're supposed to be left with that final mirror scene of, like, maybe he wasn't the killer. Maybe, like, someone else is the killer.
Oh, I never took that away. To me, the scene with, like, Buddy next door is, like, that's a domestic violence issue.
Yeah, well, and that's how I kind of took it, until I just read the thing that Friedkin said that he wanted it, like, so maybe he wasn't necessarily the killer. Also, what's interesting for a movie fact, I feel like we've been talking so much the real life implications. A fun movie fact is, so for all of the initial serial killer scenes, they're all different guys play him,
which makes sense because like you don't fully see them.
The guy that plays the serial killer in the first murder scene is the guy that gets murdered in the next scene, and they kept switching like that.
Yeah,
and he wanted
because they all kind of look alike.
Yeah, and he wanted that. He said he purposefully did that because he didn't want you to like guess who it was, and he wanted there to be like it could be anybody.
Although I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of upset that there wasn't like a huge twist, because I kind of figured that was the guy that did it. They did think it was that Tommy or Johnny or whatever his name was, somebody Lee, but that was like very short-lived. And then it kind of was like, oh, well, this is the guy.
This is it.
Also, I thought it was interesting that that Al Pacino asked the bartender who this guy was, and the bartender gave both a first and a last name
and an address.
And so then Al Pacino goes and tells his police boss, and he's like, I don't know his last name, essentially. So then the police went and asked the sex worker for all this information about him, when really Al Pacino's character had the information from the get-go. Terrible police work.
I also want to drop a real bomb on this movie of a casting what if. So Al Pacino was not the first choice.
Oh my god, no, don't tell me that. What?
The first choice was Richard Gere, because they felt he would be more androgynous. They felt he would bring more of that to the role. So he was actually...
And they could have actually showed a dick in this movie.
Richard Gere or Richard
Gere? Richard Gere.
Okay, I thought you said
Richard Gere. And also, Richard Gere showed his dick in American Gigolo. And frankly, I can't believe they had this entire fucking 2-hour movie about queer S&M subculture, and there was all those asses and no dicks. And Richard Gere would have showed his fucking dick.
Yeah,
Rowan's like now becoming like infamous for fucking people's names up.
That's what this podcast.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say he was infamous for penises, but anyway.
No,
I'm pretty infamous for that.
You're infamous for a lot of things. Yeah,
it's party sized.
So, do we have anything more on the controversy end, or
no? That's pretty much it.
Do we want to talk any more about the actual film? And I thought maybe this would be a good point that I think, even with it not being a traditional horror, to talk about, is it scary? Now that we've watched it, suspenseful, thriller?
I mean, it's scary in that, like, it sort of highlights a subculture where there is a very, like, paper-thin line between, like, consent and actual violence. You know what I mean? And in that way, like, and I think it's scary in an unintentional way because, like, Friedkin is obviously, associated with very scary movies and like horrifically things, and like The Exorcist is rightfully considered one of the scariest movies ever. But you watch this maybe and you don't kind of get that, but kind of the more you think about it, it's like in the world that he creates in this movie, every sexual act and again I know we talk about how this is pre-AIDS, but in a way it predicts the like paranoia of AIDS, in that, like, when you watch this movie, you look at it and go, every sexual encounter, it's like, am I gonna die? How dangerous is this? Like, am I gonna get murdered? Is this gonna be a fatal thing? But, and people know that there's this serial killer, and to me, this is sort of like a weird, again, predating AIDS and sort of like adopting the vocabulary of it.
Yeah.
Because there's several times during this movie when people hook up and they're like, I know that there's this, as they call it, quote unquote, homo killer out there, and that he's stalking people in the like gay S&M scene, and that this could be the one who stabs me in the back 7 times, but fuck it, you know what I mean? And like, yeah. I just find that so interesting because it's like risk reward analysis. Do I want to do this? Is it going to be worth dying for?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like I said, I mean, it's not necessarily like a traditional horror movie, like a jump scare or something like that. But to me, I kind of stated it at the beginning of the episode where, like, yeah, like, I think it's scary in the fact that, like, as we said, like, this happens, like, death and murders and stuff happen in any community, but it does happen in LGBTQ plus community at an alarming rate, and that's scary. And I think so it does bring that, like, oh my god, like, this is 1980 and we still deal with this stuff. So yeah, to me, I think it's real life scary.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Like, in terms of, like, horror movie, like, no. But in terms of real world scenarios, yeah, like, I think it's definitely scary. And I think it's scary for people in that community, for sure. Like, sorry, you just had said everything that I was thinking.
Hey, Whorehounds! Come join us on Instagram Live for Terrifying TV, where we will be reviewing horror shows. So far, we've been reviewing Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, and it's been interesting and a lot of fun, to say the least. So we post on our Instagram story every 24 hours before we're going to go live. So make sure to hit follow, subscribe, I don't know what it says, on Instagram, and come join us to watch some terrifying TV. Back to the podcast. I think, are we all okay to go to rate it?
Yep.
Yeah? So, nay, yay, or slay? Let's start with Exilia.
I don't know. Every time, I feel like I always change my mind when after we're, like, talking about it. I feel like it's a nay plus.
Okay.
It's, like we said, it's not really a horror movie, so I can't really base it off of that. But, I mean, if you want to watch it, if that's your thing, like, it's worth a watch. It's an interesting movie, and, like, I think it's kind of like in the situation of Candyman, like, it brings up a lot of questions, and it's like a nice ground for using your critical thinking skills and your mind, and I think I really like that about it.
Yeah. Mike, let's go to you.
Okay, for me, as for reasons that we have discussed already, I would definitely give it a yay. Specifically because I feel like it does not get enough credit for actually interrogating issues of consent and in terms of, like, queer sexuality being outside of the norm, and I feel like at the time it got a lot of shit for stuff like that, but in the years following that a lot of, like, academics and theorists and stuff sort of, like, took some of the ideas that were present in that. And again, this is all, like, I'm not gonna give it too much credit, but, like, you know, because it was obviously a, like, heterosexual person that directed it, which is obviously problematic. But it really did sort of, like, say it was unapologetic in its presentation of queer underground sexuality as, like, this revolutionary, outside of the norm, resistant idea. And I just think that that's a really cool idea. And so the, like, you know, sometimes obviously when you have a movie like this where it's like, and I understand, like, when you have a film where it's like, the killer is this, you know, gay person or whatever, and they're just killing everybody, and they've got, like, some weird kinky sexuality. But, like, this movie, it's weirdly sensitive in that it gives it context because it puts the killer in the perspective of that community at large. So it's not just like, it's this, like, gay person that's committing the killings. It's investigating the whole underground sexuality. And I just think that's really cool, and I don't think it gets enough credit. Like, I feel like the controversy of the whole movie at the time, I understand where they were coming from, but now I feel like it's really interesting historically to look back on it. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the context has changed so much.
Yeah.
In like 40 years or whatever it's been.
Yeah. I thought I knew what I was going to give it, but the more I think about it, I'm going to bump it up. I'm definitely going to give it a yay. I really liked it. Like I said, like, I liked the setting. I like the kind of the dirty griminess of the look, like underground clubs, the
grimy soundtrack. Fuck
yeah,
yes.
Like, the soundtrack was amazing. I think it was technically really well done.
Yeah. And people don't give him enough credit because, like, he's such a, like, he's an auteur, right? Like,
Yeah,
and this is such a technically well done movie.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of like interesting take on like a police procedural movie that kind of makes it outside of the box. And I really enjoyed it. So let's go to our favorite thing, the budget game. The budget game. So we will start with what was spent. How much money do you think they spent on this great movie that we all fairly enjoyed? Let's start with you, Mike.
I'm gonna go with $3.5 to $4 million.
Damn it.
Okay.
I was also gonna say $4 million.
Okay. So I'm gonna give you.
So we're right, is what you're saying. Clearly,
we're gonna switch it. We're gonna switch it up. I'm gonna give you both X's.
Oof.
So it cost $11 million.
Anna, ooh.
Now, I'm trying to get my time right. Now, this was after The Godfather?
It was, yeah.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Pacino probably was not cheap.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I would assume that he was not super cheap. But it was 11 mil. So let's go to what it made. What do you think it made?
$2 million.
$9 million.
So Mike will take it because Exilia did the Price is Right low ball. So it made $19.7 million.
That's a lot.
This was considered a flop. It was not critically. I saw Ebert gave it 2.5, I think, out of 4 or 5, whatever he gives.
Out of 4, yeah.
But yeah, the studio considered it a flop. It didn't do well. Like we kind of discussed, the protests, there was a lot of protests to it. There was a lot of issues, like when it played in theaters, people were protesting outside. So it kind of got swept under the rug. The studio really swept it under the rug when it came out. But it has kind of picked up this second life as newer,
almost like a cult,
almost like a cult classic where newer critics and like academics and stuff have really started to re-examine it now that we can do that with a lens.
Well, I feel like it's like I was saying earlier, this sort of shift in the way that people view movies like this. Because I feel like there were a lot of movies within that probably 10-year period that were viewed in the same way. Like, Basic Instinct was another one where it's like, people are looking at it and going, oh, there's like a queer character who is the villain. We can't have this and we're going to protest this. Instead of going, hey, like, kind of, let's appreciate the otherness of the representation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, but it totally, like, it's, I understand that, a lot of people have obviously different perspectives on this, but there is a school of thought where it says, you will look at this type of culture that's presented in this movie, for example, and say it's not supposed to be representative of the culture at large, that it is representative of, like, the kind of resistant, and I mean, especially in 2019 now, hashtag resistance, like, it is resistant to the kind of, like, dominant, patriarchal, heterosexual, kind of boring-ass vanilla culture, right? Yeah. But in that it's, like, this kind of S&M free-for-all of, like, love and sex, which is interesting. I just find it such an interesting movie. I find it would have been interesting in 1980, and honestly, in what year is this? 2019? In 2019, I find it to be an even more interesting movie than it probably was in 1980.
Yeah, certainly.
You know what I mean? Like, because we've got, 30-odd years of theoretical and social, like, cultural theory to sort of look at it and go, this is, like, an interesting take on a subculture. And it's clearly not meant to be the mainstream culture. And I just don't think the people in 1980 kind of like maybe could tell the difference between what was meant to be like a representation of mainstream culture and what wasn't. And maybe that's why people were so upset about it. And it's just like, and you know, we're like, it's like, oh, we're so unused to like being represented at all that we don't want a subculture like BDSM, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, being shown as like, but like, again, as we said several times, like they have pointed out in this movie on numerous occasions, like this is not the mainstream culture. So maybe that's just me. Yeah.
Another huge thing that's happened besides like the development of theory is the internet.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that has exposed people that would generally not be exposed to really anything besides a very, very traditional existence to things that are beyond their wildest imagination.
Pornhub.com. Pornhub.com happened, and then
it did. It happened.
The rest is,
it's a thing.
The rest is history. So I think that will be everything about the movie. So it is time to announce our next episode. Who wants to do the honors? We didn't really discuss who wants to do the honors.
I will do the honors.
Hit us.
I am going to be your ASMR guide into the caverns of the unknown, also known as the beautiful movie, The Descent.
Yes, y'all. The Descent. I'm excited for this one. Exilia hasn't seen it.
I've never heard of it. Again.
I love this movie so much that I won't do it because I am your ASMR guide. But I love this movie so much I could lick my mic right now. It is so good. So just whet your appetites for next episode.
So that is everything for this episode. I figure end it off right and say happy Pride Month to everyone, because this will be coming out, I think, the last day of the month.
Day.
Yep.
Because we're procrastinators like that.
Yes, but okay, to be fair, but there are many Canadian cities that are not celebrating Pride Month until later on in July, so...
Newfoundland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Newfoundland being the one I'm speaking of.
Halifax. Did they order
Halifax? Yeah. No, we got this. Everybody, it's staggered. It's
very staggered.
It's summer is just Pride
summer,
season.
yeah,
Pride
exactly.
season.
But
so.
I do, before we go, want to remind everyone that we did give you the Lost Boys last episode.
Yes, and the Lost Boys is like very it's very gay. It's gay.
We know what's up with David.
We
and
know
Michael,
the Lost Boys is horrifically gay. So that was the unofficial Pride selection. This is the official Pride selection.
This is the official one. But yeah, just hopefully everyone, if you've already celebrated Pride, hopefully it was fantastic and safe and just great. And if you haven't yet, and your celebrations are at a later time, celebrate the heck out of it. Obviously, we salute you, as the great Tim Curry would say. And we'll leave it at that, I guess. I'm Rowan.
Bye, it's Exilia.
This is Mike. Bye.